Governor Bruce Rauner ushers in a new day in state government, and the legislature gets down to business. We'll talk about it next on Capitol View. Welcome to Capitol View, the program where we talk about state government, sometimes the federal government, and how it just might affect your life. State government is big right now, as people in Springfield and the rest of Illinois know. And with a new governor, with Governor Rauner being inaugurated within the past week, the legislature beginning its new session, a couple of barbed words going back and forth. And some of the people who witnessed it are State House experts who are here to help talk about this. Ray Long is back, State House Bureau Chief for the Chicago Tribune. Welcome.
Good to be here, Bernie. Thank you.
And Nicole Wilson of 24/7 News, which serves radio stations across Illinois and beyond. Nicole, welcome back.
Thank you.
Okay, folks, no more business as usual. I know we've heard other people say this in the past, but Bruce Rauner made it very clear that the corrupt practices of the past are gone. He wants bipartisanship. Did either one of those things get an advantage as he talked, Ray? Where are we with the new inauguration?
Well, I think they're still trying to figure each other out here. The Democrats have been around a long time. They've seen a lot of crazy stuff by Democratic governors, Blagojevich, and they weren't real fond of the outgoing governor, Pat Quinn. But they, I think, are intrigued that Rauner is looking at trying to get things straightened out, but he's bereft of specifics, and that's what they want to say.
Absolutely. We still don't have any specifics. We do have several executive orders, though, came in right away, putting transparency and talking about transparency and ethics. He wants all of the people who are hired in politically hired positions or those Rutan exempt positions, those names on a website. You know, we have to make sure people know who's working for them. And why not come in and tackle the budget and tackle the perceived corruption or the corruption right away? Because he had a plan to come in and shake up Springfield. So he had to do that right away.
Okay, well, we'll see where it goes. We also did not have the usual in years past inaugural ball where people dress up. In fact, we had Governor Rauner, Mrs. Rauner, Diana Rauner. They've moved into the mansion on the night of the inauguration. They had a Toby Keith concert, and also Buddy Guy, the blues man from Chicago. They were, on the big seal of the state of Illinois dancing. Was that a proper tone to set? I guess we'll have to see what happens.
Yeah, I mean, it's something interesting. I thought the old balls were getting a little stuffy and out of date.
And Mr. Rauner said very similar things.
Yeah, and he was probably in tune with that. Blagojevich had like a barbecue out at the fairgrounds, and then he had a ball too, and he was a little more accessible during those events, but. This is all a different tone, and you had to pay $125 a ticket to get into these things. You didn't have.
There was food too.
Yeah, well, okay.
Lots of it, and lots of it.
Is that right? Yeah. Somehow I missed the concert. What kind of reporter?
Well, there was a football game that night. I mean, come on.
Okay. So a couple of days after Bruce Rauner took office, the legislature was sworn in. The Senate chamber, the senators reelected President Cullerton, a Democrat from Chicago, as president. House members out at University of Illinois Springfield, big enough auditorium to fit all the families and well-wishers. Mike Madigan, yet another term as speaker. Messages from Cullerton and Madigan, and what are indications of how they're going to be working with the new governor?
Well, Madigan said, well, I'm going to work cooperatively and professionally, and then he said, welcome back, Republicans, back to being a part of the operations of government. Those weren't his exact words, but basically the message was, when we ran the whole place, carried all the budgets and did all the hard votes, and you didn't have to take any hard votes, and now if you want your governor's package to become law, you're going to have to take some tough votes. Of course, what they didn't say was, the Republicans didn't like all the stuff that the Democrats were passing, and that's a reason why they didn't vote for things, too.
And then in the Senate, you have Senate President with his usual humorous candor, entertaining the crowd, but also talking about things like making it easier for people to start businesses. Don't have to go through so much red tape.
Yeah,
and,
the one-stop shopping.
Absolutely,
Which Rauner has
one-stop
talked about.
shopping.
Right.
So, I'm sure Republicans will jump on board with that. Making it easier for people to start businesses, absolutely, we'll jump on board with that. But then Cullerton says, and Governor, we need to pass the minimum wage. The voters have spoken. We need to make this happen. That could potentially be a fight, of course, if we don't get this workers' comp or tort reform package with that. Another thing President Cullerton talked about was, starting some task force to take a closer look at prison sentencing. And, we have this busting at the seams sort of prison crowd right now. And so we want to take a look at the prison sentencing and making sure that it's fair and not excessive and things of that nature.
Yeah, well, President Cullerton, of course, I remember it's actually decades ago when he was in the House and used to do some stand-up comedy near the end of the session when there were breaks in the action in the House. He doesn't do that much more, but he did use the speech for that a little. He did project on the screens Evelyn Sanguinetti, a picture of Evelyn Sanguinetti, who is less than 5 feet tall, our new lieutenant governor, and Mike Frericks, the new treasurer, who is 6'8", standing next to each other, and mentioned to the crowd, now I can see why the parties can't see eye to eye.
Absolutely.
That was one of his good. He did say he was a little fearful, because the Senate has a dress code where men have to wear a coat and tie, that Governor Rauner would show up in his Carhartt jacket. So, thank you. I'm just saying what John Cullerton said. Anyway, on we go. So Governor Rauner did have a couple of press availabilities, one the day after the inauguration, another one later in the week, where he did produce these executive orders and say, we're done with the corruption. I remember Rod Blagojevich in his first full day in office had a press conference where he talked about all the changes and actually handed out a list of people who were fired.
Yeah, one was in the room too.
One was in the room, the person who had set up the press conference for him, who had been a governor's aide for a number of years. That didn't happen this time, and yet we know many people throughout state government, and it's at least in the hundreds now, have gotten their pink slips or have resigned to make way. And these are the top-level people who are not protected by anti-patronage rules, the Route 10 rules. So some of the people that we know who are gone, Mark Miller, who was director of Department of Natural Resources, Amy Bliefnick, director of the State Fair, Julie Hamos had resigned already. She was director of Department of Human Services, which is a big one. And people coming in include, James Meeks, it's not a paid position, but he's a former state senator, pastor on the south side of Chicago, who is now the new chairman of the Board of Education, as appointed by Mr. Rauner. And of course, the Senate has to approve some of these people. Jeff Mays, a former state legislator from Quincy, in our listenership area, watcher area, whatever, viewer, is the new director of Department of Employment Security. Again, he'll have to go through Senate confirmation. This is a pretty big shift. We all know people who are losing jobs or getting jobs.
Right, and I think you've really shown a little bit there about how Rauner was trying to reach out to different folks. Jeff Mays, I saw him in the last round of the weekend campaign events over in Quincy when Rauner went through there. He's been a Republican who was a steady voice, a conservative Republican from Quincy for years and years. Back when you and I covered the House back then, we actually covered him. And he is now, he's gone through the Chamber of Commerce positions and the Business Roundtable, and now he's moved up, and he's going to probably end up being a prominent voice in the administration, even though that agency is not necessarily one that is known as a powerful agency. Having a guy like that in your cabinet can show that he has some influence. On the flip side, you have James Meeks, too, a longtime Democrat from Chicago. He ran initially as an independent, caucused with the Democrats, eventually ran as a Democrat, and he's been a guy who's been pro-school choice. So we may see him work into a path where the governor and he will try to get some more charter schools around the state. And there may just be more options for people who want to put their children in different schools than they're going to.
Yeah, and again, that becomes one of those issues where Democrats And some people say it's because the teachers' unions, have enjoyed the cap on charter schools because you don't have to have certain kinds of union rules or unionization in some of the charter schools. The Democratic legislature will have to go along with these changes to change that law.
Right,
So it will be this tug of war that might
Exactly.
show up between what is still an overwhelmingly Democratic legislature and the new Republican governor. James Meeks, there was a little bit of controversy because he was somewhat of a strong advocate against same-sex marriage, through his, teachings at his church. I did ask him about it, so he was criticized by the Equality Illinois, I believe it is. But I asked him, would that have an effect on his job at the State Board of Elections? That was one question he didn't seem happy to take, but he said no.
Education.
Education.
Yeah.
Education, that's
Yeah.
right. Education,
Yeah.
State Board of Education.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And part of the problem that Equality Illinois has with James Meeks is their concern because they have all of these issues with homosexual kids in schools who have to deal with bullying and other issues, and they're not sure that or confident that James Meeks will adequately address those issues for those students who are being bullied and have to face other types of issues within the schools. They're not sure if he can or will be willing to do that.
Okay. Yeah, and for the record, he just said that he didn't think this would affect his job. We'll see where that goes because obviously anti-bullying is something that the State Board has watched carefully, and there's been a lot of talk about that nationally as well. On his way out the door, Governor Pat Quinn did some things. He appointed some people to positions. He he's been proud all along of being the non-Blagojevich in dealing with prisoners seeking pardons or clemency, and he did issue many of those as part of what he did toward the end. But they've created some controversy.
Well, absolutely. Anytime you're going to go through clemency actions and change people's sentences, you're going to have some blowback. This time there was more blowback because some of the cases were high profile when they happened. There was a cop who was shot by some other cops in Chicago in a shootout who his sentence was cut short, and there were a variety of others around the state that have been popping up. And so we hear a lot of folks who say that they didn't really have a chance to argue from the victim's point of view, or the prosecutors didn't have a chance to get in there in the last round. And it appears that Quinn was in a rush to get things done and build up that cut through the backlog that he inherited from Blagojevich, but also tried to take on some of the more controversial cases that he had before him.
Indeed. He also tried to pass actually sign some executive orders last minute that would apply to Governor Rauner, for example. And maybe were just designed to embarrass Governor Rauner, because one of the things that campaigner for re-election Pat Quinn said was that, Bruce Rauner, you should reveal all of your tax returns and all of the schedules. Rauner released the top pages of his returns just to give us, the public, it's more than is required by law right now, as Bruce Rauner made a point of saying, but it isn't what many candidates give out, like, Mitt Romney's hundreds of pages, which turned into campaign fodder, which of course Quinn was hoping for, and still thinks through his executive order that next governors should have to reveal their full tax returns. But Bruce Rauner has basically said, no way.
Well, I've given more than I am required to by law, essentially, and I think still Governor Quinn is very bitter about that. Governor Quinn, as you said, was hoping it would create some campaign fodder. It would create this sort of divide between the average person and the wealthy, and people would see that Rauner could not represent their best interest because he was so far out of touch because he had this money. And that didn't happen. And, Governor Rauner comes in and he issues this executive order asking for state employees to reveal more of their potential conflicts of interest as it relates to their finances. And so I think one of the questions posed to him was, well, how can you ask workers to reveal these types of things if you're not willing to do this yourself? And he said, I am. Whatever I'm asking them to do, I am doing. So,
but that doesn't include full tax returns.
Exactly.
So there are limits on things.
Right. Well, he'll have to somehow overturn Quinn's executive order at some point. And, maybe in the fine points of finely written orders down the line, we'll see some kind of dodge in that. But I don't think he intends to try to reveal what Quinn wanted him to reveal, and I don't think he's shown any interest in following that order so far.
Yeah, speaking of money, some campaign finance reports have started to come out. The 15th of the month was the deadline for, I guess, the last 3 months of the year, and I know that the Tribune story today said that Bruce Rauner spent something like $37 per vote.
Yes,
it was like
yeah.
$65 million total over the year and a half
yeah.
or so that he was in it.
Yes, and it was an amazing total, of course. This kind of just gives everybody an idea of the price of campaigning here. $65 million in total Rauner spent. Quinn was in the 30-some-odd range, and 27.6, I believe, out of Rauner's own pocket. So that is something I think Quinn is a little bitter about too.
Sure.
I talked to him a couple of weeks ago, and these are things that he just kept bringing up, and clearly the ability to pour that kind of money into anybody's campaign could help any of us up here get reelected,
Right.
or anybody watching
And what's
elected.
odd, of course, and one of the things I know Quinn mentioned probably to you and others is that he had signed a bill for the first time to create limits on campaign spending in Illinois. But the other thing was that once you reached a certain level,
$250,
if a candidate himself put in at least $250,000, as Bruce Rauner almost immediately did, the caps are blown for everybody, and that's why Illinois returned to the wild, wild west in this. And are caps in Illinois just a dead idea?
Well, wild, wild west, and that did not necessarily end on November 4. Governor Rauner made a mad rush on the 31st. December 31st, to put $10 million out of his own pocket into this account, and two of his wealthy friends added an additional $10 million. Now, had they waited not even 12 hours, those two friends would have only been able to give a total of about $10,600. So major, take advantage of a major campaign finance loophole right there.
Which was opened by him blowing the caps.
Yes.
Right.
And what's interesting about this, and I don't know, Jack Franks, who is a Democratic state representative, who has pushed transparency in government and was with Governor Rauner in the governor's office this last week to announce the fact that they would be putting all the political appointees, or at least high-level appointees online, said that he was troubled by the fact that Governor Rauner and his friends just put this $20 million in under the gun at the end of the year. As what did Governor Rauner say? He's going to use this for necessary influence against the special interests, but this is money. It sounded like he was talking about, the public needs to know. Maybe it's advertising, maybe it's campaign contributions, but is fighting money with money, does that put him in a realm of the people he is complaining about?
Well, that's an interesting question. He clearly is taking a different approach, and he's clearly using money to have potential influence here. In other words, if you go by what I do, you can get my backing. If you need help because you are getting a tax, you can get my backing. If you don't do what I do, you may get an opponent, and a well-funded one too. So these are the kinds of things that lawmakers have not had to think about before. They've seen Speaker Madigan with a $5 million war chest or something in the Democratic Party machine and think, oh, I can get some money out of that. But now they're looking at $20 million in a little pot from Rauner.
And I wonder if it was that last-minute addition to that campaign account that maybe changed Speaker Madigan's mind on that special elections bill, because we had been hearing, that Speaker Madigan would, that comptroller election the comptroller appointment is something that needs to be worked out at the executive branch, and then all of a sudden we see a change in his tone, and that he actually backs the special election bill. So I don't know if he felt like, Rauner was trying to kind of flex some muscle with this $20 million, and he's saying, wait a minute, we're going to show you who's in charge here, and we can flex back.
Yeah, and of course, Judy Bart-Topinka's untimely death after election, but before the inauguration, led to the question of, who appoints, and so we had an interim comptroller, Jerry Sturmer, who was the Governor Quinn's finance chair, and now Leslie Munger, who is from Lincolnshire and ran a close race but lost for state representative. A Republican has been named by Bruce Rauner to be comptroller, and the legislature passed the bill that says there will be a special election in 2 years. Same time as the presidential election, which is usually good for Democrats in Illinois, for the last 2 years of Topinka's term, and that's where we're at. And Leslie Munger basically said, I want to get in there and use my fiscal conservatism to help groups that really need it and try to control what I can from the comptroller's office.
And while Governor Rauner was very upset and asking them not to pass the special election and threatening to go to court over a special election, Leslie Munger is saying, well, I'm just in the race. If they pass it, I'm in the race. It's no big deal. So.
Right, and even Rauner said he wasn't going to file a suit. Now, that doesn't mean somebody else won't come out of the woodwork and file something.
Yeah, many Republicans in the legislature got very upset during this debate, although partisan debates are like that, so depending on which side you're on. The other new officer we have, Mike Frerichs, the new state treasurer, Democrat from Champaign, did issue an executive order this week basically saying no politics will be forced on anyone in my office. I won't take contributions from anyone. He's trying, I think, to show that whatever people said happened under Dan Rutherford or past treasurers is not going to happen with him. Pretty typical these days.
Right. I think everybody says, well, the last guy was a dog, and now we got to clean up the doghouse,
Right.
And so we saw that with Blagojevich, of course. We saw that with a string of
as
other...
he was collecting $25,000
right,
campaign contributions
right.
from people and giving them jobs in return.
Right. And
apparently.
Yes,
well, he's in prison, so I can say that.
Yeah, right. It was pretty well evidenced that even before the election he was plotting this out in a bipartisan fashion. So we, these are things that you're supposed to do when you are coming into office. You do the right thing, and then we'll check and see if you're following up on doing the right thing, or we'll see if you write stuff out with loopholes in it. That campaign finance law is one that is a great example of it.
Very interesting. Speaking of doing the right thing, Lou Lang is the state representative from Skokie, a Democrat who was the sponsor of the bill that would allow the cultivation and sale of medical marijuana for certain illnesses in Illinois. And it was signed into law by Quinn more than a year ago, and rules are there, but licenses were never granted. And Lou Lang was really hot in the press conference he had last week before the General Assembly came in, and after just mad that Governor Quinn didn't do this, hoping that whatever work has been done will be taken over by Governor Rauner and just push forward. But Governor Rauner has basically said, we are worried about the process, want to review things, which again could hold us back. Thoughts on where that's at? And I hadn't watched it as carefully as some other issues, and just seeing those arguments, it made you realize, when that there are some very severely ill people that are waiting for this and are on the list but can't get it yet in Illinois.
And the way it looks is that those very severely ill people will be waiting at least 6 months from my purview at this point, because Governor Rauner is saying, hey, I have some concerns about that whole process. You have people who were working within the administration who left and did some contract work and now may be associated with some of those businesses that may be licensed, and he doesn't think that's appropriate. And he says, I want to take a closer look and understand how the whole process worked before I make any decisions on whether we will start issuing those business licenses. So there's no telling how long it will take before that happens.
But he did say that the law is a law. So
he will honor the law, but
right.
It's a pilot program, and so it could, he could honor the law in a year or 2 years, and then it could just phase out and not be re-implemented.
Interesting. We as reporters don't usually try to make ourselves the story, but I have to say, Ray Long, I just want to say how great a job you have done down here, and I'm saying this because the Chicago Tribune, somehow you have worked to deal with them. You're going to be moving to Chicago after being with the Associated Press for a few years, and 17 with the Tribune at the State House, being their bureau chief, and you'll be moving to Chicago. Tell us a little about that and your thoughts about going to where traffic is really hard to deal with.
Yeah, I hear they have a red light issue. Basically, I'm over the moon about an opportunity that I've had, and that is to go up and work as an investigative reporter on the watchdog team in the Tribune main office, but I'll be covering a variety of things, expanding beyond just state government. And it's a great opportunity. I am thrilled about it. And so they gave me the word just recently, and
Well, congratulations. And
I
how many
appreciate
years
it.
have you been president of the Illinois Legislative Correspondence
You
Association?
know, I've been trying to figure that out myself.
Well,
Several,
you've
many,
been
many.
a good voice for the press corps, which
appreciate that.
sometimes has to deal with legislative leaders and governors to make sure that things are handled correctly, just as far as the flow of information. So thank you, and best of luck to you and Peggy.
Thank you.
And Monique Garcia will be coming down to replace
Right,
you, who
right.
was one of the public affairs reporting interns some years ago and does a fine job. So,
Excellent. She's excellent, yes.
with that, I would like to thank Ray Long and Nicole Wilson. I'm Bernie Schoenburg. Thank you, and we'll see you next time on Capitol View.